Connecticut is known for quiet towns, old money, and revolutionary history that feels like it's been polished clean for tourists. But buried inside that history is a name so toxic that even centuries later, Americans still use it as an insult. Say it out loud, and you can almost feel the air change. Benedict Arnold. Not just a man, but a symbol, a warning, a national scar. And the craziest part is this. The more you dig into his story, the harder it becomes to keep it simple. Because Benedict Arnold didn't start as a villain, he started as a hero. The kind of hero people would have built statues for. The kind of hero who bled for the American cause, fought like a man possessed, and nearly died more than once to help the revolution survive. So how does someone go from that to becoming America's most hated traitor? What happened inside his mind, inside his pride, inside his life that made him turn against the very country he helped create? That's the real story people don't talk about, not the meme version, not the history book shortcut. The psychological collapse, the slow burn, the moment a man stops seeing himself as a patriot and starts seeing himself as a victim. And once you understand that transformation, you'll realize something uncomfortable. Betrayal doesn't always begin with hatred. Sometimes it begins with humiliation. Sometimes it begins with being ignored. Sometimes it begins with a man who feels like the world owes him everything and refuses to accept anything less. Before Benedict Arnold became a punchline, he was one of the most aggressive fighters the revolution had. He wasn't born into a perfect life either. He came from Connecticut, from a world where reputation mattered almost as much as survival. In a culture like that, being respected wasn't just nice, it was oxygen. Arnold wanted to be seen as important, powerful, remembered. He wasn't content being average, he wanted greatness. And early on, he chased it the way some people chase money or fame today. When the American Revolution began, Arnold didn't hesitate. He threw himself into the fight with a kind of reckless energy that made people notice. He took risks other men wouldn't take. He moved faster, hit harder, and acted like he had something to prove every single day. This wasn't a man who wanted to quietly serve the cause. This was a man who wanted the cause to serve his legacy. And in the beginning, it almost did. One of the first major moments that made Arnold famous happened at Fort Ticonderoga, a place that sounds like something out of a fantasy novel but was brutally real. This fort mattered because it held weapons, cannons, and power. Arnold helped capture it early in the war, and suddenly he wasn't just a businessman from Connecticut, he was a warrior with results. People noticed. The revolution needed men like him, men who could turn chaos into victory. But even in these early days, something dangerous was forming inside Arnold, because Arnold didn't just want to win, he wanted credit. He wanted recognition. He wanted the world to say his name and mean it. And the moment you crave credit more than you crave the mission, you become vulnerable, not to the enemy, but to your own ego. As the war grew more desperate, Arnold kept pushing himself into the fire. He fought in brutal battles, made bold moves, and at one point he played a major role in the American effort at Saratoga, one of the most important turning points of the entire war. Saratoga is often remembered as the moment the American cause became real in the eyes of the world. It helped convince France that the Americans weren't just rebels with dreams, they were a force that could actually win. And Arnold was right in the middle of that story. He fought with a level of intensity that sounded almost suicidal. He was wounded badly. He could have died, but he didn't. He survived. And in another timeline, that injury would have turned him into a national legend, a scarred hero who sacrificed everything for freedom, the kind of man kids would have learned about in school with admiration instead of disgust. But history doesn't always reward sacrifice the way we think it should. Sometimes it punishes it, and Arnold took that personally. Because while Arnold was risking his life, politics were happening behind closed doors, promotions were being handed out, credit was being assigned, men who didn't bleed as much were being praised more, and Arnold watched it like someone watching their own funeral while still alive. He felt overlooked, disrespected, underpaid, underappreciated. And what made it worse was that Arnold wasn't completely wrong. He did contribute, he did fight, he did sacrifice. But the revolution wasn't just a battlefield, it was a political machine, and Arnold didn't have the patience to play the game. He wanted the rewards without the diplomacy. He wanted honor without compromise. He wanted respect without waiting. And when he didn't get it, the bitterness began to grow like mold in a dark room. The psychology of betrayal often starts with a story people tell themselves, a story where they are the hero and everyone else is blind. Arnold began to see himself as the only one who truly understood what the revolution required. He saw others as cowards, opportunists, and hypocrites. He saw Congress as corrupt, slow, and ungrateful. And the more he felt disrespected, the more he began to believe he deserved something bigger than what America was giving him. This is where the shift begins, not with money, not with the British, but with a wounded ego that refuses to heal. A man who feels cheated begins to believe cheating back is justice. A man who feels betrayed begins to believe betrayal is survival. And Arnold slowly, dangerously, started to justify things in his head that would have once disgusted him. Then came the part of his life that made everything even more explosive, his time in Philadelphia. Philadelphia during the Revolution wasn't just a city, it was a pressure cooker of politics, power, gossip, and social warfare. It was where reputations were built and destroyed like they were nothing. And Arnold entered that world already carrying a chip on his shoulder. He was injured, frustrated, and increasingly obsessed with status. And in Philadelphia, status wasn't earned only on the battlefield. It was earned in rooms, at dinners, in conversations, in alliances, in who you married. And Arnold married into a world that would change him permanently. He married Peggy Shippen, a young woman connected to loyalist circles, people who still sympathized with the British. This wasn't just romance, this was a doorway, a bridge between Arnold's growing resentment and the enemy's opportunity. Imagine the psychological storm happening inside Arnold at this point. He's a war hero, but he's also broke. He's admired by some, hated by others. He's physically damaged. He feels ignored by Congress. He feels mocked by elites. He feels like the revolution is run by men who don't understand sacrifice. And now he's surrounded by people who whisper a different story in his ear. Maybe the British aren't the real villains. Maybe the rebels are ungrateful. Maybe the war is pointless. Maybe Arnold deserves a better life than this messy, chaotic, uncertain future. And when you put a wounded ego into a room full of people offering validation, you don't get healing, you get corruption. Because validation feels like medicine, even when it's poison. Arnold started living beyond his means. He started making choices that made people suspicious. He got involved in financial controversies. He was accused of misusing power and taking advantage of his position. Some of it may have been exaggerated, some of it may have been real, but the damage was done. His enemies grew louder, his reputation started to crack. And for a man like Arnold, reputation wasn't just important, it was everything. When people attacked him, he didn't feel criticized, he felt threatened, like they were trying to erase him, like they were trying to strip him of the one thing he believed he earned, honor. And the more he felt attacked, the harder he became into someone who couldn't forgive, someone who couldn't forget, someone who started to see America not as a cause, but as an ungrateful crowd. And this is where the story becomes terrifyingly human, because Arnold didn't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to betray the revolution. It wasn't that clean. It was more like a slow mental rewrite. He began to tell himself the revolution was failing, that the leaders were incompetent, that the ideals were fake, that the war would end badly anyway, that the patriots were hypocrites who preached freedom while ruining lives. And once that narrative took hold, betrayal started to feel less like treason and more like a smart move, like a man escaping a sinking ship, like someone choosing the winning side before it was too late. That's the most dangerous part of self-justification. It makes the The moment that changed everything was when Arnold was given command of West Point. And if you don't know why West Point mattered, imagine it like this. West Point was the throat of the revolution. It sat in a position that could control the Hudson River, a critical artery for moving troops and supplies. Whoever controlled West Point could choke the rebellion or keep it alive. Giving Arnold command there was a sign of trust. It was a powerful position, a position that could restore his reputation, a position that could make him feel respected again. But it also gave him something else, something far more dangerous. It gave him leverage. It gave him a bargaining chip big enough to sell to the enemy. Arnold began negotiating with the British behind the scenes, not just casually, not just emotionally, strategically. He offered them West Point in exchange for money and a commission in the British Army. This wasn't a man acting in a moment of panic. This was calculated, planned, cold. And it's here that the final version of Benedict Arnold begins to take shape, the version America would hate forever. Because now the betrayal wasn't theoretical, it was real. It was deadly. If his plan succeeded, the revolution could have collapsed. Soldiers could have died. The war could have ended differently. And Arnold, the once hero, would have been the man who strangled freedom in its cradle. The British sent a man named Major John Andre to handle the secret operation. Andre was charming, intelligent, and exactly the kind of person who could make treason feel like diplomacy. Arnold and Andre met in secret. Papers were exchanged, plans were discussed. The deal was moving forward. And Arnold probably believed he was about to win. Not just win money, win revenge, win recognition, win control of his own story. He likely imagined a future where the Patriots would regret how they treated him, where they'd realize too late that they pushed their best fighter into the arms of the enemy. That's the fantasy of a bitter man, not just to leave, but to leave in a way that makes everyone suffer for underestimating him. But then something happened that Arnold never expected. The plan was exposed. Major John Andre was captured with incriminating papers. The secret exploded into public reality, and suddenly the name Benedict Arnold wasn't just controversial, it was radioactive. Arnold fled to the British side before he could be arrested. He escaped. He survived. But in that moment, he lost something far more valuable than a job or a uniform. He lost his identity. Because the moment you betray your people, you don't become a hero to the other side. You become a tool. And the side you betrayed doesn't just hate you, they erase you. They turn your name into a curse. They make sure your legacy becomes a warning label for the rest of history. When Americans found out, the reaction wasn't normal anger. It was something deeper, something personal. Because Arnold wasn't a random soldier. He was one of them. He fought beside them. He bled beside them. And the betrayal felt like a friend stabbing you in the back while smiling. It wasn't just strategic treason, it was emotional treason, the kind that makes people question everything. How could a man who fought so hard turn so completely? How could someone risk his life for the revolution and then sell it? The truth is, the same traits that made Arnold a great fighter also made him a dangerous personality. His ambition, his pride, his hunger for validation, his obsession with respect. Those things can build heroes, but they can also build traitors. Because if your loyalty is tied to your ego, then your loyalty is always conditional. It lasts only as long as you feel rewarded. And here's the darkest part. Arnold didn't see himself as evil. He likely saw himself as justified. He likely believed America betrayed him first, that he was simply taking what he deserved, that he was correcting an injustice, that he was making a rational choice in a world full of chaos. This is why people still talk about him, because his story isn't just history, it's psychology. It's a case study in how resentment can rot a person from the inside out, how a hero can become a villain without ever admitting to himself that he crossed a line. And if you think that kind of transformation is rare, look around the modern world. Look at careers destroyed by ego, friendships shattered by pride, people who feel disrespected and decide to burn everything down. Arnold's story is old, but the emotions inside it are timeless. Major John Andre, the British officer involved, was eventually executed by the Americans, and while Andre was technically the enemy, his death became a strange moment of sympathy even among the patriots. He was seen as honorable in the way he faced death. Meanwhile, Arnold, the man who caused the entire disaster, escaped punishment. And that fact made the hatred even stronger. Americans didn't just hate him because he betrayed them, they hated him because he got away, because he lived, because he didn't hang, because he didn't suffer the way traitors were supposed to suffer. He became the villain who escaped the final scene, the monster who walked away while others paid the price. Arnold joined the British Army and fought against the Americans. Think about how insane that is. A man who once fought for American independence, now wearing the enemy uniform, attacking the same cause he once bled for. It's the kind of plot twist that feels too dramatic to be real, but it was. And every time he fought against the Americans, he wasn't just fighting soldiers, he was fighting his own past. He was trying to prove his choice was correct. Because once you betray something that big, you don't want to face regret. Regret would destroy you. So instead, you double down. You commit harder. You become the villain fully, because turning back would mean admitting you were wrong. And for Arnold, being wrong was insufferable. By the time the war ended, Arnold wasn't celebrated by the British like he probably imagined. He wasn't embraced as a great hero. He was tolerated, used, and quietly distrusted. Because here's a brutal truth about betrayal. If you betray one side, the other side will always wonder when you'll betray them too. A traitor is valuable, but never lovable. Arnold may have gotten money, he may have gotten a rank, he may have gotten survival, but he didn't get respect. Not real respect. Not the kind he craved. And that's the tragic irony. The very thing he wanted most became impossible the moment he did what he did. Back in America, his name became a permanent stain. Parents taught their children to hate him. Soldiers spit when they heard his name. Stories spread like wildfire, and Connecticut, the place he came from, carried this strange burden of producing the most infamous traitor in American history. Imagine living in a state that helped birth the revolution, only to have one of its most famous sons become the symbol of treason.
That's why the story still feels personal. It's not just a guy from the past, it's a national betrayal story with a hometown origin, a local legend that turned into a national insult. But the untold part isn't just what he did, it's why. And to understand why, you have to understand something about human nature. People don't fall from grace because they suddenly become evil. They fall because they start believing the world owes them something. Arnold believed he deserved recognition, wealth, status, and admiration. And when he didn't get it, he didn't adjust, he didn't accept it. He didn't humble himself. He turned it into a grudge, and that grudge became his identity. That's the danger of pride mixed with pain. Pain makes you emotional, pride makes you stubborn. Together, they create a person who would rather destroy everything than feel small. And that's where part one ends, because now we're about to enter the most chilling question of all. What happens to a man after he becomes the most hated name in America? What happens when you survive your betrayal, but you can never escape it? What does it feel like to live as the living definition of treason? And what did Benedict Arnold's life become after the world turned his name into a curse? Because the real punishment wasn't just losing America. The real punishment was becoming a man with no home, no trust, and no honor anywhere.
After Benedict Arnold escaped to the British side, you'd think the story would end with some dramatic victory for him, like the villain riding off into the sunset with gold in his pockets and revenge in his heart. But real life doesn't reward traitors the way movies do. In fact, Arnold's real punishment didn't come from an executioner's rope or a prison cell. It came from something colder and more permanent: isolation. Because once you betray your own people, you don't just lose your country. You lose your belonging. You lose the ability to be trusted by anyone ever again. And Arnold discovered that fast. He crossed over expecting respect and security, but what he walked into was suspicion, quiet disgust, and the kind of polite tolerance reserved for someone useful but dangerous. He was valuable to the British as a symbol and as a weapon, but he was never truly one of them. They could shake his hand, give him a commission, and pay him for information, but deep down they knew the truth. A man who sells out his own side is a man who can sell out anyone. Arnold didn't just become America's traitor, he became a man without a team. Still, he tried to prove himself. He fought for the British, he led raids, he attacked American targets, and there's something psychologically brutal about that. Imagine the mental gymnastics it takes to go from "I'm fighting for freedom" to "I'm burning the homes of the people I once called brothers." That's not just switching uniforms, that's erasing your own past. Arnold wasn't simply fighting Americans, he was fighting the version of himself that once believed in the revolution. Because if he admitted even for a second that he made the wrong choice, the guilt would crush him. So he doubled down, like many people do when they commit to something irreversible. He leaned into the betrayal so hard that there was no room left for regret. That's what makes his story so unsettling. It's not just treason, it's a psychological point of no return. A man burns the bridge behind him, then convinces himself the fire was necessary. But the British didn't embrace him the way he imagined. There was no parade, no true hero's welcome, no deep admiration. He was given a rank, yes, and he was used in military actions, yes, but there was always a quiet distance. Officers didn't fully respect him, loyalists didn't fully trust him, and patriots wanted him dead. He was trapped between worlds, belonging to none. That's the hidden cost of betrayal. You might escape punishment, but you can't escape what you've become. And Benedict Arnold became a man whose name was a stain that followed him into every room. What's even more twisted is that Arnold still believed he was the victim. That's the thing about ego, it doesn't die easily. He continued to feel wronged, he continued to feel underappreciated, he continued to feel like history misunderstood him. And in a way, that's the most human part of his entire story, because Arnold wasn't a cartoon villain laughing in a dark tower. He was a complicated man with real achievements, real wounds, real pride, and real resentment. He did heroic things, and he also did unforgivable things. And the tension between those two realities is exactly why people still talk about him today. Because America loves simple stories, heroes and villains, good and evil, loyalty and betrayal. But Arnold's story is a warning that the line between hero and villain is sometimes just one decision made at the worst possible moment by a person who can't control their own bitterness. After the war ended, Arnold's situation didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. The American Revolution had created a new nation, and Arnold was permanently locked out of it. He couldn't return home, he couldn't clear his name, he couldn't rebuild his legacy. In the United States, Benedict Arnold wasn't just a person anymore. It was a label, a synonym, an insult. It became the ultimate accusation. Even today, if someone betrays their team, their friends, their country, their values, people still say, "What a Benedict Arnold." That's not normal historical hatred. That's branding. That's cultural immortality of the worst kind. Arnold didn't just lose the war, he lost his identity. His name stopped belonging to him and started belonging to the public as a symbol of treason. And here's something most people don't realize. The British didn't exactly treat him like a prized trophy after the war either. Arnold moved around, he struggled financially, he tried business again, including in places like Canada and even back in England, but he was never stable, he was never fully secure. The man who betrayed America for money and status never truly got the life he wanted. Instead, he lived under the shadow of his own decision. And psychologically, that's a nightmare, because Arnold wasn't the kind of man who could live quietly. He needed admiration, he needed significance, he needed people to acknowledge his greatness. But his betrayal destroyed the one thing he craved more than anything else: honor. Think about how humiliating that is. In America, he's hated. In Britain, he's mistrusted. Everywhere he goes, his reputation arrives before he does. That's the part of the story people forget. The traitor doesn't just betray others, he betrays his own future. He trades long-term belonging for short-term gain. And even if he survives, he's forced to live in a world where no one truly respects him. That's not victory, that's exile. But the hatred didn't fade. In the United States, Arnold became something almost mythological. People didn't just condemn him, they obsessed over him. He became a moral lesson taught to children. He became the cautionary tale soldiers whispered about. He became the name that parents used when they wanted to scare their kids into loyalty. The cultural anger stuck because his betrayal struck at the heart of what America was trying to become. The revolution wasn't just a war, it was an idea, a belief that people could unite and fight for something bigger than themselves. And Arnold's betrayal felt like proof that even the strongest believers could collapse into selfishness. It was terrifying. If Benedict Arnold could turn, then anyone could turn. And that fear made the hatred burn hotter. Even George Washington, the man known for his discipline and calm leadership, felt the betrayal deeply. Washington had trusted Arnold, he had defended him at times, he had seen his value, and then Arnold tried to hand the British a weapon that could have crushed the revolution. That's why the betrayal felt personal to the entire country. Arnold didn't just betray the cause, he betrayed trust itself. He betrayed the idea that sacrifice means something. He betrayed the belief that heroes stay heroes. And yet, here's where the story becomes dangerously fascinating, because if you strip away the anger for a second, you're left with a question that refuses to die. Was Benedict Arnold always evil, or did something break him? The honest answer is that he wasn't born a traitor. He was built into one, piece by piece, wound by wound, disappointment by disappointment. It started with pride, then resentment, then humiliation, then obsession with recognition, then the feeling of being cheated, then the belief that betrayal was justice.
That's how the mind rewrites morality. It doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in a slow internal conversation where the person keeps moving the line inch by inch until the unthinkable becomes acceptable. This is why his story feels so modern, because we've all seen versions of this. The employee who feels overlooked and decides to sabotage the company, the friend who feels disrespected and decides to ruin the group, the public figure who feels entitled and turns bitter when the applause fades. The human brain is terrifyingly good at justifying selfish decisions when pride is wounded. Benedict Arnold is just the most famous example of that mechanism playing out on the largest possible stage. Now, let's talk about Connecticut for a second, because Connecticut is the birthplace of this name that became a national curse, and that adds another layer to why this story still spreads so well online. People love local legends that became national nightmares. Connecticut isn't usually seen as dramatic. It's not the first state people think of when they imagine chaos or scandal, but that contrast makes it even better. A quiet state producing the loudest betrayal in American history. It feels like a twist. It feels like something hidden. It makes people click, and it makes people watch because they want to understand how something that huge could come from somewhere that looks so calm.
And the final twist is this. Benedict Arnold's betrayal didn't even work. West Point didn't fall. The revolution survived. America won. In the end, Arnold didn't destroy the nation. He only destroyed himself. That's the part that feels poetic in the darkest way. He tried to become powerful by selling out the cause, but the cause outlived him. He tried to make history regret him, but history used him as a warning. He tried to secure a legacy, but his legacy became the worst possible version of immortality. Not remembered with respect, but remembered with disgust. So why do people still talk about him? Why does his name still carry weight centuries later? Because his story isn't just about war, it's about identity, it's about ego, it's about the human hunger to be valued. Benedict Arnold wanted to be seen, he wanted to be appreciated, he wanted to be honored. And when he didn't get what he believed he deserved, he chose revenge over belonging. He chose pride over principle. He chose himself over everyone else. And that decision didn't just change his life, it branded him forever. There's also something deeply American about the way his story survives. The United States is built on loyalty to an idea: freedom, independence, self-determination. Benedict Arnold represents the nightmare opposite of that idea. He represents the fear that even the people closest to you can betray you for the right price. That fear is universal, but in America it hits harder because the nation's origin story is tied to loyalty, rebellion, sacrifice, and unity. Arnold's betrayal is the shadow in that origin story, the reminder that the revolution wasn't just fought against the British, it was also fought against human weakness inside the patriots themselves. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If Arnold had died heroically before the betrayal, he would be celebrated today. Statues, schools, maybe even a holiday in some towns. But he lived long enough to make the choice that erased everything. That's why people can't look away, because his story proves something terrifying. One decision can rewrite your entire life. One moment can turn your name into a curse. One act can erase years of sacrifice. And that's why the phrase "America's traitor" still lands like a punch, because it's not just about him. It's about what any human is capable of becoming when pride is wounded deeply enough. In the end, Benedict Arnold didn't just betray America, he betrayed the version of himself that could have been remembered as great. And maybe that's the real reason his story still haunts the country. Because deep down, people aren't just angry at him, they're fascinated by him, they're horrified by him, they're trying to understand him. Because if a man can fight for freedom with everything he has and still end up selling it out, then loyalty isn't guaranteed by bravery, it's guaranteed by character. And character is tested most when someone feels unappreciated. So, the next time you hear someone call another person a Benedict Arnold, remember what that name actually represents. It's not just a historical insult, it's a warning carved into American memory, a reminder that heroes can fall, that pride can rot, and that the most dangerous betrayals don't always come from enemies. Sometimes they come from the people you trusted the most, the people who once stood beside you, the people who once looked like they would die for the cause, until one day they decide the cause isn't worth it anymore. And that's why Connecticut's most hated figure is still talked about, not because his story is old, but because his story is eternal. Because somewhere inside every era, every nation, every workplace, every friendship, the same question keeps returning. What happens when someone who feels disrespected decides to burn everything down? Benedict Arnold answered that question for America, and the country has never forgotten it.